Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of That Was Unexpected. In previous episodes, we've touched on accessible travel with our adventurous friend Lindsay Knott, Vacate CEO Hayley Brown, and Susan Wielden from Airbnb. But there's so much more ground we can cover when it comes to the wonderful world of travel. So today, we'll be chatting with co-founder of Supported Travel Experiences, Andrew Hager, and Julie Jones, Executive Editor of Travel Without Limits magazine. Welcome to the pod, everyone. Andrew is a co-founder of Supported Travel Experiences, with a professional career spanning over 2 decades in executive, consulting, and advisory roles. Andrew has over 15 years' experience in the travel and tourism sector and is passionate about customer experience design and improving outcomes for people with disabilities. Julie has decades of experience travelling with her son Braden, who lives with cerebral palsy. Her determination to make the world more accessible for him has led to a successful blog, a massive online community, and now a travel magazine addressing the specific needs of travellers with disabilities.
Are you sick of the same old disability stereotypes? We were too, so we did something about it. Welcome to That Was Unexpected, the Disability Lifestyle podcast for everyone. Brought to you by Youngcat and hosted by me, Lisa Cox. Join our amazing guests as we delve into topics that don't often hit the headlines. So let's do this. Prepare for the unexpected. If you're low vision like me or have other accessibility requirements, check out our show notes. Before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of land on which we record. We pay respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. We're doing another episode today on travel because isn't that what we all want to do? You skip up our jobs and travel and do nothing else. Okay, that's not realistic. But today we've got 2 awesome guests who you've heard a little bit about. Now, Julie, so great to speak with you. I've been following all your work for years because even though I'm disabled, I still want to travel, and so do so many other people with disabilities. Now, you've got a travel magazine, you've got a great community, but your son was the catalyst for your inclusive travel journey. Could you tell us some more about that?
Sure, it's lovely to be here. I was a traveller when I was young. My parents were a little ahead of the curve and they took me travelling for 6 months to Europe when I was a child. And so that really gave me an absolute passion for travel. And I always imagined doing the same thing with our children. So when Braden was born with a disability, it threw a curveball to us. And we sort of thought, oh, well, that's the end of our travel dreams. But then I guess over time we realised, actually, we can do this. We need this and it will be great for the kids. And it was really a lack of information that was the catalyst for everything, because when we did a big trip to the US for the first time with my son, I said to my husband, it feels like we're the first people landing on the moon. Like there's just no information and we can't be the only people traveling with a loved one with a disability. And it just seemed ridiculous, like in the era of, I guess, the early stages of the internet, because Brayton's 29 now. So there just wasn't very much out there. So that was really the catalyst for us starting everything.
Awesome. And so our listeners have an idea of what you're talking or who you're talking about, rather. Everybody's different with a disability. Some people can walk, etc. So what sort of access requirements does Braden have?
So Braden uses a wheelchair full time. He travels with a manual wheelchair because we find that's much easier, and he does not have any problem with being pushed. He quite likes it, to be honest, and he can self-propel when he needs to. He needs help with transfers, but he can do a standing transfer, and we need to travel with things like a portable commode chair and other equipment just to make sure that when we do travel, we have things that we need when we're away from home.
Okay, cool. So much like one of our other guests, Lindsay, who was on a little while ago, you've got your suitcase full of your clothes, and then there's a huge haul of extra equipment that comes along with you.
Exactly, because you just can't guarantee that when you get somewhere, the setup is going to suit your needs. So I think it's already a little out of your comfort zone to be away from home when you have such specific needs. So it's important to take what you can with you.
Yeah. Now, Andrew, you started Supported Travel Experiences in 2020. You've helped people domestically, internationally. see the world. What motivated you to do that?
Exactly. So it's an interesting story. So my business partner and I purchased a travel agency that wasn't a disability travel agency. And we purchased that we took it over in November 2019, 3-4 months before COVID. So the worst possible time that you could buy a travel agency. And as we were going through COVID, my business partner was working part-time for a large consulting firm at the time still. He was working in their accessible infrastructure space. So he was traveling fairly regularly. One of his team members is an ex-Paralympian, a wheelchair user. He was traveling with him. On about 3 or 4 occasions, they would face issues when they were traveling. So in some cases, they would check into a hotel room that the internal travel team had booked as the accessible room and find it wasn't accessible. And at 10 o'clock at night, they having to find another hotel room. Other cases, the airline wasn't aware of the wheelchair requirement. So my business partner came back to me. I do have a travel background. He doesn't. Whilst I don't have a disability, my partner is vision impaired with opposite vision. My son is autistic, so I'm well versed to the challenges that people face traveling. And my business partner came to me and said, look, is there anyone in the travel space that's specializing in helping people with extra needs or disabilities travel? And there really wasn't. So there's a few good players that do similar things, and there's some tours that you could take. But if you want to go and travel the world, and as part of that travel, you need requirements like you need some support, or if you need an electric bed or you need hoist, you can't walk into a regular travel agency. They do that. So we looked at it and we felt that there's definitely need in there to help people. We started talking to the disability sector during COVID, saying, look, we think there's an offering here. We think we can help if we provide this type of service. So we got some feedback around what wouldn't work. And we started from there. So during COVID, obviously our borders were closed. We started doing domestic trips, so helping people just travel within the country or within the states, depending on where they were able to travel, and expanded from there. So the borders opened, we started doing outbound and the same service offering, so providing everything that people need when they're traveling. And recently, about 12 months ago, we've actually started an inbound business, which is about helping people from overseas come into Australia. I guess it wasn't something we intended to start. It actually grew from COVID, and it's something we're really, really passionate about and very rewarding helping people travel.
It's really cool. And you're probably one of the only businesses that has grown from COVID, because I think it had disastrous effects across the tourism industry. And I love also that you are completely engaged with the disability community. It's not just this thing you are doing for them. You are all entwined with us, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we're really trying to advocate for the disability sector as well. So we are talking to airlines, we're talking to suppliers about how they can improve their accessibility that makes it easier for people to travel, because it can be challenging. So it's about how do we get the right information and how do we advocate for people.
That's really good to hear, because a nice trip is one thing and posting some pics on Instagram, but the real issues come at the policy end and all of those sorts of things that you're working on, which don't make pretty pictures on social media, but they're the sorts of things that need to change to make the world more accessible to us. Now, Julie, you do some really great work and talk about finding a way around the world without being in tricky situations so that it's open to us. What are some of the tricky situations that you and your family find yourselves in?
I think it's just the fact that there's not enough information out there. Information is power. And I just remember one trip we were doing to tropical North Queensland, who have done an amazing job since in providing accessible accommodation. But at the time, many years ago, we were looking for an apartment. I remember I thought I had finally found the perfect place, and I rang the property and I said, I just wanted to double check that there are no stairs. And she said, no stairs, we have a lift. And I said, so there's no stairs at all, even to the lift? Oh, there's just a few stairs to the lift. So it's that kind of, lack of information, because yes, we could have bumped Braden's wheelchair up the 4 stairs or whatever, but realistically, every time you come in and out of the property, it's extra strain on our body and not as comfortable for him. And it's just that lack of understanding. People thinking that there's a one size fits all for disability is one of the great challenges, because it's worked for one person in a wheelchair or with certain needs. It might work for you, but that's not the case. Braden prefers a bath to a shower, as an example. He would be very unusual in the, wheelchair community in probably wanting a bath instead of a shower, but he can manage that. So I think it's, perceptions from The community is one of the challenges, and that's even within the disability community. I will say sometimes I will post something on Facebook and people will say, I can't afford that. And everyone with a disability is on the disability support pension. Well, that's not true. I have people that, want 5-star accommodation. So we all have to understand that, like any other sector of our community, the disability community has various needs. So information is power, and the more information people can provide us with, the less tricky situations we will find.
That's an important point to raise about us all being different. A holiday for some people might be the hotel down the road, but for others, it might be the first class trip to Europe. But that's just like the non-disabled community. Everybody's different. And Andrew, you deal with all sorts of people with all sorts of disabilities, different goals for their holidays. Some people, I don't know why, want to do bungee jumping, crazy stuff like that. But then there are other people who perhaps want to do completely different things. How do you and your colleagues work around those different goals?
Yeah, we really work with them and their support network if they have this full network to break it down. So we go to a lot of detail to try and understand what they want to achieve. So what their goals look like, what's a fantastic holiday look like, what's it absolutely must-haves and nice-to-haves. Then we break that down in terms of, okay, how do we manage that? So what support do you need when you're actually achieving that? So we work a lot with the support teams. So whether it's occupational therapists or support workers or family or friends or whatever that may be, to actually say, okay, how does this work get done in life? What sort of support do you need when you're actually traveling? And then we just go off and arrange that for them, breaking it down to really understand the details for the person traveling, because there's still, everyone's so unique in this space. I've heard the saying, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, like everyone's really different. So we need to hear it from the customer. We need to hear it from the network as to how we can help them.
Okay, Julie, I think you probably touched on this before with some of your other answers. But for those of us who are traveling with disabilities, what are some of the key things for you in terms of this is how I get around it, or these are the ways I overcome that massive travel obstacle?
I think a little bit like Andrew said, you have to really work out what your priorities are. And I think for us, it was really, we started local. So we worked out what made a good holiday for us, what were the things that were really important to us when we traveled, and what equipment we couldn't do without, because that's super important too, because the more stuff you take with you, the bigger the burden, really, to be honest. As much as I say, take what you need, that can also become a burden when you're trying to get accessible taxis or just, try and navigate your way around airports and things like that. So I think it's super important to work that out. And then I think having a game plan before you even travel. So working out if you're traveling overseas, and we take a repair kit for my son's wheelchair, a basic repair kit. So we talk to his wheelchair supplier and ask for what we might need. If something happened, we take that with us. But then also to know if you have, say, a power wheelchair, what would happen, like where, if you were traveling to, say, New Zealand, where could you get that repaired? If you've got medical needs, what hospital would be close by? So we had a case last year of Brendan having concussion, and it was probably the first time I hadn't looked in the hotel compendium when we arrived to check that out. But I think those sorts of things, if you're traveling with somebody that's medically fragile, just having a bit of a game plan ahead of time and working things out, doing things like putting air tags in your wheelchair or an Android equivalent in your luggage, like really thinking through worst case scenarios and making sure you have a plan for it.
That's really great advice for people who do want to get out. So of all of the traveling you've done, give a shout out to any hotels who do have really good setups, because we want to use this platform to promote businesses who are doing a good job, as well as not just shitting on the ones who are doing a bad job, but promoting the businesses who are doing a good job.
I'd say for me, Lake Mac Holiday Parks, which is in New South Wales, is about an hour and a half from Sydney. I was just in awe of the extent that they had gone to. The manager of the holiday parks had just gone to such a lot of effort to work out what would make a good accessible cabin. The accessible cabins would have cost a lot more, but when I spoke to him a period of time afterwards, he said the return on revenue had been a lot quicker on those accessible cabins, which I thought was a really good business model for people to look at. That yes, it did cost more, but they had respite places and other places booking it out because it was such good accessible accommodation. So what made it good accessible accommodation? The cabin was accessible. They had fob entry, so it wasn't a case of a heavy door. They had in the kitchen, which we love self-catering facilities because it makes your travel dollar travel, further. And it also means if you have dietary requirements, you've got something there that you can just do. But they had the stovetop and all the cupboards go higher and lower. So they electronically could be raised to accommodate a wheelchair. Accessible bathroom. They had a view, Lisa. They actually had a view. No garbage bins, no back alley, no, revolting view. It actually had water views. So the accessible accommodation was just as good as everyone else's, probably better, in fact. The facilities around the park were really accessible as well, which was great. And they built upon that. So they then put in accessible playground features. They put in a water wheelchair and a ramp into the pool, which was great. And then probably as a knock-on effect, I'm not 100% sure, but years later, they opened up an accessible boardwalk. So you can literally wheel out the door of your accessible accommodation, which was already beautiful, to a regular walkway that was there, and then join this accessible boardwalk, which was just lovely. So that would be, as far as mainstream accommodation that I have seen, that would be my top pick.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. And for our listeners who don't know why I was being sarcastic before and had a reaction, the accessible accommodation is usually on the ground floor facing the car park or garbage bins or something like that. So the idea that people with disabilities would want a view is astounding. Breaking news.
I've also broken down a part of that when I've met with hotel managers, in that people give bad TripAdvisor reviews if they're given accessible accommodation and they don't need it. And so within the hotel industry, apparently, there is just this backlash with guests if they get the accessible accommodation. And I heard this from somebody in Melbourne, and I was astounded because I was not traveling with my son, and I was staying in one of their non-accessible rooms, which was tiny. And I went to the accessible room and it was just like huge. And it was like, who would complain about this just because there's a couple of grab rails in here? But apparently people see it as though they've got a downgrade in their accommodation.
Know people who've also, they're not disabled, but have been put in the accessible rooms and like, look at all this space. Thank you very much. They think they've been upgraded. But anyway, Andrew, now we hear so many bad stories about airlines, accommodation, everything like that. Rightfully so, when one poster has a bad experience, they take to social media and that goes viral. But what are some good experiences that you've had?
Look, we've had good and bad experiences with the airlines. We often find with the airlines that we work with their accessible teams, that information doesn't necessarily translate through to the ground staff. The training doesn't always work, but we've had some fantastic experiences as well. So my experience and traveling with my partner who is visually impaired, everyone at the airlines and everyone at the airports are really trying to go in the way to assist. So they're very friendly, they're very helpful. Sometimes there's the procedures that they have to follow that can be challenging. We've had clients have some amazing success stories. We had someone come to us. They were a wheelchair use, so they couldn't speak. They had not complete visual impairment, but they were visually impaired as well. And they had a goal to travel to Africa and do an African safari. And they came to us and said, can you make it happen? It's not an easy one. So we were able to arrange an accessible safari in Africa for him, and he was an artist. So he wanted to go over there and draw, and he went with a photographer and a support team. I think it was a 10 or 11 day completely accessible safari in accessible vehicle, accessible lamping, and just had the most amazing time. And, it's that sort of experience that we want to be able to facilitate for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to do it.
That's incredible. I assumed it was probably possible, but thought of having to organize all of that just overwhelms me, makes me feel a bit ill. And so that's the sort of thing that you guys take care of, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's feeling something a lot of people have, and it puts people off traveling. And to be honest, for people without disabilities, organizing travel could be it can be really difficult. And you add the complication of, I've got these accessible needs that I need to manage when I'm traveling, and people otherwise just don't do it. And our view is they're missing out on experiencing some amazing things.
Oh, for sure. And you mentioned previously the Qantas accessibility board. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, they've quite a process a little while to get some feedback into their accessibility, which is really about how do they improve accessibility as an airline. We're talking to Virgin as well about the same thing. Our experience with both airlines is they have the fantastic intentions to improve accessibility, but they're very large organisations and their ability to change is not quick. That said, there are making improvements. I know Virgin just announced recently that in Adelaide Airport, you can experience going through the airport, the security process, and even actually boarding the plane without actually having to fly. So yeah, they call it a trial before you buy. So if you've got kids with autism or if you're a wheelchair user, what does that look like, and is air travel for you? So you can experience that. So there are things like that that the airlines are trying to do, but that said, it is still a significant challenge for people with disabilities.
Question for both of you, depending on who's got the experience in this. Selfishly, I'm asking for myself because I want to travel overseas. So one of my biggest fears about traveling overseas is that it's hard enough in Australia where like I need to find an accessible toilet or a lift or something like that. But when there's a language barrier, that's a real problem. So I tend to stick to the English-speaking countries or in Australia, and that's great, but not great in some ways.
Translate is your absolute best friend. I found in Japan that was our best friend. And I think also making sure you're aware of the different terminology in different countries. So in Japan, for example, they refer to their accessible rooms either as barrier-free or universal design. In the US, they have a variety of categories. So they refer to them as ADA rooms, which is Americans with Disability Act. And they will have some ADA rooms which have a bathtub with a seat over the bathtub. So like a bench that goes over the bathtub and the height adjustable shower. So you have to be quite specific and say ADA rolling. And that's even in another English speaking country. So I think it's really important to sort of familiarize yourself with that. But I would also say that some of the non-English speaking countries may not also have the same infrastructure in place that you would get in some of the other countries too. So it depends on your needs as to whether that suits you as a traveller, I think.
Pre-disability, I used to camp and backpack and do all the stuff staying in cheap hostels, but that was accessible for me because I was walking and it was no worries. But these days, unfortunately, I can't get off the beaten track per se, and I have to stick more so in the touristy areas, which isn't as much fun as taking a motorbike up the back hills of Thailand or something. So are there countries, I was going to ask what your favourite destination is, but specifically countries where you can get away from the concreted footpaths but still get the accessible experience?
I would say that we had an incredible experience in Fiji, and my husband thought I was absolutely off my nuts suggesting it as a destination. But he and I had travelled there many times when I worked in the travel industry, and I was desperate to take my kids there. And I knew that my son Braden would just be part of the village in Fiji. I knew he would love the Fijian people. And I will say that we didn't want to stay in Denarau, which is probably the safest place to stay if you are traveling and you have high support needs. But Braden can do a standing transfer. So it was a case for us of let's see how far we can push this adventure. And it really came down to the Fijian people. They don't have the infrastructure, but they have the will to make sure nobody's left behind. So it depends on how comfortable you are. I guess they were picking Braden up and taking him up on boats and lifting his wheelchair and doing all the rest of it. But we found Fiji incredible. And I put a lot of time into researching, which I think is always key, and planning ahead. And I emailed the different operators and said, this is my son's situation. Would you be happy for him to be a part of a tour? So we did a quad biking tour as an example where he doubled with my husband on the quad bike. And they said, come in ahead of the tour. We'll see. So they did a lap around the streets of Fiji. We went prepared with non-slip mat to go under his bottom and an oki strap to strap him to the bike with. So we kind of went prepared with what we thought might make it work. And they said, we just want to see him on the bike first. So it's a case of sometimes those off the beaten places, do work. But I will say accessible toilets, very hard to find even at places where we went for, a day tour. It was really hard. We had to just, manage.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm terrified of going back to Thailand with disabilities because you know how it works. Andrew, what are some of your favourite destinations that you've helped clients get to?
One of my favourites is Greece. So we travel to the Greek islands. I would say from an accessibility point of view, Athens has its challenges. Getting around Athens, and even with my partner, the streets are not stable. So that could be a challenge. But the Greek islands, surprisingly, or at least the ones I've traveled to, are actually reasonably good. I know Greece, in the last sort of 5 years, it made, I think it was 220 beaches wheelchair accessible.
That, yeah.
Yeah, so still some challenges there, and you need to understand that. But it's definitely a favourite destination of mine. I love Europe. We travel through Europe fairly regularly. Again, it has some challenges, but we've actually been able to arrange some amazing itineraries through Europe for people with power wheelchairs in small towns that you wouldn't otherwise think is possible. You just need to, as Julie was saying earlier, information is critical. You need to know ahead of time what can work and what doesn't work. But I guess that's the information we're trying to provide people. But yeah, favorite destinations for me would be Greece, US as well. I've traveled regularly to the US through some of the national forests, and some of those are actually fairly accessible as well.
Well,
So
nice.
yeah, there's a lot of options for people.
Are there any accessible bushwalk trails here in Australia?
Yeah, there's one. I was actually talking to a supplier the other day up in 1770. So they offer a accessible sort of walking experience. They've got an accessible trail, but they've also partnered with a local company up there that provide accessible glamping services. The tent setup are all accessible, and the people that run that are actually registered support workers and carers. So they can actually provide the support working care if you need that as well.
They get it. Oh, that's so good to know about, because I miss all the camping stuff and having a few trees around and things like that. So we've asked about your favorite destinations, but what, in your opinion, is completely overhyped and just don't even bother? Julie?
Wouldn't say don't bother, but I'd say city travel is probably a little overhyped because it is safer. I will say the last year we did a trip to Western Australia. We were hosted for a trip to Western Australia when we travelled from Exmouth to Perth. And we'd been wanting to go there for ages. And we had been thinking, well, without traveling with our own beach wheelchair, how are we going to do it? And I had this whole sort of preconceived idea. It wasn't going to be manageable unless we could build our own beach wheelchair that could travel in a suitcase. So my husband had actually started that process. And then we received the itinerary, and I was surprised at how many places actually had facilities for access. So places like Turquoise Bay, they had a beach wheelchair. The rangers would deliver it to you at the beach. You couldn't get more remote. Monkey Maya, they had the most incredible accessible villa with 2 bedrooms, water views, and then they have got a beach wheelchair to do the dolphin experience, and they should be very soon getting beach matting as well to get down to the water. So Ullaru's gorgeous, and it actually has quite good accessible infrastructure in place. So yeah, I think they've got accessible accommodation. Their buses, you can remain in your wheelchair if you want to go to the tours. We managed Field of Light and Sound Silence Dinner. Tricky because of the sand, obviously, but we did manage it. I think sometimes just getting out and enjoying nature. I see through my community, there is a lot of desire for nature-based, and as you were saying before, nature trails, all those sorts of things, because we're so used to the accessible walk being, sort of 100 meters of concrete, and then all the best stuff is where you see people heading off to. It's like, I just want to go there too.
So tips from both of you about people looking for accessible travel from your different points of view as a person with disabilities or a carer of someone with disabilities, and as someone who organises travel, what would your top tips be?
A couple for me, obviously I'm biased, but I would say work with a trusted travel agent, one that knows your circumstances, knows your requirements, can organise that. And the reason I say that is that they are there to assist you all the way through the trip. So they can do things like travel agents, arrange things in advance. But if something does go wrong, a travel agent can help you in that situation. So they are there to assist you. So, that's a bit of a bias, but that would be one tip. But the other tip I would say is, and I think we mentioned it earlier, if you're overwhelmed, start small. Your first trip doesn't need to be a 4-week trip through Europe. You can go to a local town, you can hop on a plane and travel to another city in Australia for 3 or 4 nights. See what works for you, see what doesn't work for you, and then build up to some of those bigger trips. Find out what support you need. As Julie was saying, what equipment do you really have to have them? What can you potentially leave behind to make things easier? Start small, build up to some of those bigger trips.
Yeah, great idea. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your company, I fly to a destination, I need to get to the hotel. Sometimes both of them can be accessible, but it's the transport in between Can you sort that out too?
Yeah, we can. So we can do a range of things. We can have someone meet you at the airport and assist you. We can get access to wheelchair accessible vehicles and vans. So we work with you to understand, can you self-transfer to a seat, for example? Do you need to remain seated in the wheelchair when you travel? And then we basically work with our transport companies globally to provide that sort of service for you. And as I said, if you do have your support with someone to meet you there and assist you, we can arrange that as well.
Excellent. And what about you, Julie?
I would say no question is too silly. Don't ever feel that you can't ask a question. And I would also say, I agree. I mean, I used to work in the travel industry, so working with a travel agent is a lovely safety net and a lovely way of having things researched for you. If you are researching it yourself, I would say research, plan, research, ask questions. If you're booking a hotel, I would say make sure you don't ring their, say you're booking a Sheraton or an Intercontinental, don't book there. Don't ring their main reservations number because it could be a toll-free number. You might be ringing from Australia for a hotel in Queensland, and in fact, they are in Hawaii answering the call. So they don't know that property intimately. I would say make a little list of the things that you really need, say, in a hotel room, particularly if you're a wheelchair user. If you need clearance under the bed for a hoist, that's really important. When I write my reviews now of hotels, I've taken into consideration the things that my readers have told me they need to know. So if they're traveling with a commode chair that goes over the top of the toilet, they need to know the height of the toilet from, to the pan and to the seat and that kind of information. They need to know if there's a shower bench. Some of my readers need a shower chair rather than a shower bench because they need their arms to actually push up through to get up, and they can't do that on a shower bench. Look for photos, YouTube videos. We might be all a little cynical about TikTok, but a lot of people do walkthroughs. Certainly when I do a review of a hotel, I do video because I think video gives you a much better spatial awareness of a room. So really look for that information and just arm yourself with as much as you can. Word of mouth in the disability community is incredible. People can't wait to say when something's been great and also can't wait to say when something has been bad. I would say with the bad and even with the good, just remember again that all needs are different. What hasn't worked for you? We went to Rottnest Island. It was fantastic for us, but I had several readers say it didn't work for them. Rottnest Island had a changing places bathroom. It had a beach wheelchair. It had beach matting. We had a buggy we could get around with for the day. It worked fine for us, but other people had said for them it hadn't worked. So just always take that into consideration when you're hearing the good and the bad. And when you see bad press, don't let it put you off, because I will say clickbait is what, every media outlet wants. They want you clicking through to their website because those clicks means that they earn more money. So yes, there are bad stories, but what we tend to see is the best, the sobby story that's supposed to pull at your heartstrings about a person with a disability. And we see the absolute worst where somebody's had to haul themselves up the stairs of an aircraft because there's been no lift to get them there. So it's really important to keep that in mind.
That's right. There's a huge range of us. Some are, either end of that spectrum, but there's a big fat chunk of us in the middle who just go about life. Now, I normally finish this by asking all of our guests what about themselves is unexpected, but I'll put a traveler's spin on this. So what about you or your travels has been most unexpected?
Fiji was the most unexpected. The fact that the Fijian people were so welcoming and they went to such great lengths to make sure Braden could be included. We did an electric bike track over Old Plantation Railway, and we went to look at it ahead of time and said, Braden's feet will be dangling. We'd taken Oki straps and the non-slip matting and everything else. And we said, could we use that polystyrene box to put under his feet to make it easier? And by the time we went back for our actual tour, they had built a wooden bench, like a wooden stool to put under his feet. We were the only people that turned up for that tour that day because it was raining. And it was, I think, a good sort of example for operators too, that putting in the effort is just really rewarding, not just from the fact that Braden could do it, but also because we were so keen to do it. A bit of rain wasn't putting us off. So I think tour operators really do need to understand that the not just the good that you can do by being accessible and welcoming people with disability is worthwhile, but also from a monetary point of view, would you turn down any other business? I suggest you would say no. And when you turn down, Braden, you're turning down 4 family members. So it's financially viable as well. That was a bit of a tangent. I'm sorry.
Feel free to go on tangents anytime. I doodled. And I absolutely right. In another podcast, we spoke to one of the guests about just that sort of the business case for it. And I think the example I gave was going somewhere after a conference and there were 10 of us, obviously only person with disabilities. So it wasn't just me that you're putting in that lift or that accessibility for, it was the other people as well.
Yeah.
Now, Andrew, what about you? What's been most unexpected in all of your years of travel?
The thing I love about travel is just immersing yourself in a local experience that you wouldn't otherwise know or expect. And a story I reflect back on, and it wasn't accessible, so I better preface that. But I was looking after the tourism side of Queensland for a while. They've got a train that runs between Normanton and Croydon, the Gulf up north in Queensland. And I was there hosting the Channel 7 travel show that we're filming the train. And I was there hosting it, and we spent the day filming, and the producer and the cameraman and I were sitting outside the hotel at the evening, and a guy came up to us and said, we sort of sitting there and there's a helicopter at the back, and he came up to us and said, would you like to up in the helicopter? And we looked at him and said, I need to go to the hotel. And he said, yeah, but I do chopper rides. So we get into this helicopter and it had no doors at all. So you're strapped in, and he went high. I don't know if you know Normanton's got this really big river. It's quite a large river. And he went so high that the river was like, it was tying, and he swerved it. And it was the only time in my life that I sat there and went, I actually think I've made a really, really bad decision here. So producer and I are in the back of the helicopter with no doors. The cameraman's out the front. He's hanging out the side of the helicopter. He's got a GoPro filming things. And it was an amazing.
Sounds terrifying.
Was her. Sort of terrifying. That's an accessible story. The thing for me, the unexpected thing for me is those things that you don't plan when you're traveling, that you can experience, that you just wouldn't otherwise have been able to even think about it. And that's what, for me, makes traveling so much fun.
Yeah, and chopper rides would highly recommend. I took a chopper ride a little while ago, and the guy there who was built a tank just picked me up and hoisted me in. So it doesn't have to be off limits. It's a great way to just see everything, because I couldn't physically get around it all, but I just got to see it all in 20 minutes instead. Right, I'll quickly ask, people generally get uncomfortable when you talk about disability and finance in the same sentence, but I think it's really important to put those sorts of figures out there, because the travel industry is so influential in changing things for us. So what do they need to know about the worth of the disability dollar in the tourist industry?
Yeah, Austrade did some research into this just recently. I think they released a report earlier this year. They looked at domestic tourism. So they looked at the spend of domestic tourism and found that I think it was around 21% of all spend of domestic tourism in the first quarter of 2023. So 21% of that was for people with accessible needs and the people traveling with them. And that equated to 1/4 of about $6.8 billion. The spend is significant. We often hear from people saying, oh, you're operating in a niche market. And we really challenge that conversation to say it's not a niche market. 1 in 6 people globally identify as having a disability. The spend people are having significant. It's a mainstream market that everyone should be aware of.
Definitely. And like Julie said before, it's not just that one person with disabilities, it's the 4 other family members. It's definitely not me.
I also think we need to identify the fact that a lot of, what Andrew said was the number of people that identify as having a disability. So a lot of people age into having the same needs as somebody with a disability. So I often use my family, which I don't think we're that unusual, but my dad has dementia. So that's a hidden disability, and he needs quite a lot of care around that when he's out in the community. My mum started off using a walking frame when she sort of started needing greater mobility aids, and then a wheelchair, but she would not identify as disabled. My brother-in-law has a prosthetic leg through diabetes. My mother-in-law aged into needing a walking frame and a wheelchair. But again, I don't think everyone is captured in those figures simply because there are so many people that actually don't necessarily tick that box of I have a disability, I've just aged, I have a bad hip, I have a bad knee, but I can't step into a bath or I can't step over a hob. So it's actually a really lucrative market. And I speak to a lot of destinations. My elevator pitch is 1 in 5 Australians identify as having a disability. We travel in larger groups because we often are traveling with people to assist. In our case, we travel as a family of 4, even though my sons are older. We stay longer because it takes us longer to do a lot of things. And once we go to that effort to get somewhere, we want to make sure we can do everything that we've spent our airfare to do. And word of mouth in the disability community is incredibly strong. So it's really worth catering to this market. And it's the right thing to do anyway. If I say to somebody, would you feel sad if you couldn't travel with your loved one if something happened to them tomorrow? Most people say yes. So if you think of it, if you give people the why as well, you definitely need that economic basis because businesses are really struggling as well as everyone else is struggling these days. But you just want that sort of why, that empathy, that desire to do it. And I have to say, when people see Braden experiencing something and they see his euphoria and our absolute joy, I find that it touches them. Like they're really thrilled to see it, that sort of sharing, in his joy. And I think it does make people want to do better, but it's just getting to that point.
It's really, really great to have spoken with you both, and you're doing incredible work both with your own communities, disability communities, and also challenging higher up the food chain, so to speak, with the policy, which do need to change as well. But where can people find you and find out about all the incredible things you're doing?
So you can find me at havewheelchairworldtravel.net or on Facebook, Have Wheelchair World Travel. I also have a Facebook group where people love asking questions and having a community to answer them. So that's Wheelchair Accessible Australia on Facebook, and also have travelwithoutlimits.com.au where we cover a range of needs when you travel. So there's plenty of free information out there to help people get traveling.
Awesome. And what about you, Andrew?
Yeah, so we're Supported Travel Experiences. You can find us online. It's www.supportedtravelx, as in the letter x.com.au. We're on the various social media channels.
We'll put those details in the show notes so that people can find them. I'm so glad there are people who have experience in travel, but also get this whole disability thing. Thank you both for being on the podcast.
So much, Lisa. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to That Was Unexpected. If you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, then hit subscribe wherever you get your fix. Have any questions or topics that you'd love for us to tackle? Great. Email podcast@youngcare.com.au. We can't wait to hear from you. Check out our show notes for transcripts, video recordings, and to find out more about our guests, plus the useful resources they share. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn at Youngcare Oz. Let's not forget, an inclusive community is everyone's business. So let's keep working together to break down barriers and smash some stereotypes.